Okay, so if you've got the closed captions turned on, you would have seen all that. Hi everybody, welcome to episode 2 of App 2025. Apparently I still don't know how to work the mute button on my microphone. Today we are going to cover a new step in our app for any company, and that's express workflows for quick running processes. These are AWS step functions, express workflows, and these should be the default in your new architecture. So even if you have a business process that right now is one Lambda function, one AWS Lambda function, you should consider wrapping that in an express workflow. And I'll explain why. That gives you a little more functionality as that process grows. So rather than having that fragility and the temptation to go insert some of your business logic into your Lambda function, you can continue to refine that workflow with your business analyst. And for more on this, you can see some of our previous episodes of the serverless office hours with AWS step functions on the AWS channel. Those are also available with links in the chat. So today we're gonna go back and review the architecture, where we got to so far, what we've put up there. We're gonna introduce AWS step functions, express workflows. We'll compare these with step functions standard workflows so that you can have a basis or a framework for deciding when to use which and which one's more beneficial for you. I'm gonna give you this express workflow event loop pattern that we sort of touched on the first episode. And we're gonna talk about how to put the events back onto the event bus when you're done running your express workflow. And then finally, we're gonna build all this together. Again, in Visual Studio Code, using SAM CLI. And with one exception, we have to build one Lambda function today, but it's gonna be sort of a universal one that gets reused, and we'll talk about that later. And then of course, we'll do Q&A at the end, Q&A as we go. Ask whatever questions you have. I'm just happy to be here. I'm happy to have you with me. So let's get started. All right, so if you remember last time, we're talking about any company, which is just a generic software as a service provider. And we went through Ben Ellerby's event storming process to generate eventually some bounded context in 3 microservices: customer, operations, and billing. We'll return to this right now. Today, we're gonna work on building out this subscription expired process, the business process. And we're gonna start very simple, as you might when you're like founding your company, like a startup. And then because it's an entire workflow, you have the flexibility to iterate in the additional functionality and definition that you need later. But if we look at this architecture, remember we talked about an Amazon EventBridge custom event bus sort of running left to right through time. And events go onto the bus, business events like those that we defined. And at that point, a workflow or a business process or a number of them should pick them up and respond to them according to their own needs, right? So the bus and the producers don't have to know about downstream consumers. They just put the event onto the bus, and whoever's interested in it picks it up. The general pattern that we're gonna work up to is gonna be to listen to that event via a rule, run it through a workflow, and put the completed event back onto the bus. It's that simple, but it's powerful. This is gonna be just almost all of your application, right? So it's a very powerful workflow that we can build through. Now, I promise we talk a little bit about the difference between standard and classic workflows. So I'm sorry, standard and express workflows. I always do that. They're gonna be so mad at me. I just dropped some links here in the chat channel. The first one is the launch blog for express workflows. The second one is standard versus express workflows. And if you click on that one, I'm gonna bring this down on screen for you. Look at this. There's a couple key areas that I wanna highlight for you. So probably the first one, if you've been building a lot with standard workflows, you know that they're very durable and they can run for up to a year. That's a very powerful construct when you need it. When you don't need it, it just is more than you need, right? So that's one of the first differences is duration. An express workflow will run for a maximum of 5 minutes before it times out. Now, that's what we see here on this first line for maximum duration. What you're also gonna see is the concurrency is wildly different on these, right? So out of the box, your default standard workflows can support a start rate of 2,000 workflows per second, whereas express workflows support over 100,000 per second. So you can see that as your business grows and you start getting more and more events put onto the bus more rapidly, you've still got plenty of capacity to consume those and to kick off your workflows. Pricing is different, and this is another one of the links that we put in the chat here. You see AWS Step Functions pricing. The classic workflow, standard workflows pricing is based on state transitions. So as you move through states in your workflow, the Express Workflows pricing is much more similar to AWS Lambda. It's based on the number of executions you run and their duration. So it's like a sum of gigabyte seconds. And that is a declining price for gigabyte seconds. That's the same measure that we use for AWS Lambda functions as well. So this should be pretty familiar. So you pay $1 per million requests, and then 6 cents per gigabyte hour for the first 1,000 gigabyte hours. A gigabyte hour is 1,000, sorry, it's 1 hour of 1 gigabyte of allocation, and that allocation is flexible. Your workflow takes however much it needs, and we'll see an example of that in the logs. And that's in increments of 64 megabytes. And then an hour is an hour, right? But that's split up just like AWS Lambda functions are today into increments of 100 milliseconds. Yeah, EDJ Geek is right. I'm just gonna say the wrong thing over and over, but I will always correct myself. That is my solemn promise to you. Then we got execution history as well. So if you saw us for the launch of the AWS Step Function support in the AWS Toolkit for Visual Studio Code, you see that we brought visualization from the console into that extension. That's really powerful for Express Workflows because the AWS Management Console by default doesn't provide this. You can still track your workflows and how they're executed by enabling logging. We'll go through that later today. Later in this session, I'll give you an example of how to configure that and the code for configuring that along with the permissions. And you also see one of the links that we pasted in the chat here, Step Functions Logs, gives you the required IAM permissions that you're going to need to enable for CloudWatch logs on Express Workflows. And then another key one, if you saw our episode on Step Functions on Tuesday of this week, we went specifically over service integrations, and we talked about the 3 service integration patterns: request response, run a job, which is the .sync, or sorry, job run, which is .sync, and callback, which is .wait for task token patterns. Express Workflows don't support those 2 last patterns. Only standard workflows support those 2 patterns. So that's the key difference. In general, what does this mean for you, right? If you're building your application and you're looking at your business process and you need to know, okay, which one of these do I pick? In general, I would suggest that you start with Express Workflows and say, this is how I'm going to build this. And then you look for reasons why you have to move off of it. Okay, so let's say you have a manual step in there where you dispatch an approval email to a director level manager that has to wait for a callback, and that could take obviously longer than 5 minutes. Well, Express Workflows are no longer going to suit your use case. If you need to use that callback pattern, not necessarily for people, but for other service invocations, or if you want to run synchronous jobs, like AWS Batch, AWS Glue that we reviewed in service integrations, that may not be a good use case for you to run Express Workflows. But when you start out of the box, I would suggest that you just say, okay, all my workflows now are Express Workflows until proven otherwise, because you're going to get the benefits of increased concurrency. You're going to get the benefits of generally lower pricing at the volumes. And it's a good way of just getting that pattern set. Okay, so looking in the chat here, I don't see any questions yet. I'm just gonna keep driving on. All right, so let me go back to this pattern real quick. The way that we get an event is via EventBridge's rules. And let me pull up an AWS console, AWS Management Console window for us here. I love it when it logs me out, even though I checked. And then you get to jump back in there, you know what I mean? But we adapt, we're flexible, we overcome. Let's bring this in here and blow it up a little. Hopefully this time in the right window. Okay. So if you remember last time, we can also go into VS Code and look here. We had built a couple, like we sort of skeletoned out our microservices, and we built an event bus declaration in a SAM file. And all we did was name it event bus and then capture its location in this SSM parameter to use for later. So if we look at this back in the AWS management console, we've got our event buses and we have our custom event bus for any company, right? So at this point, I've got schema discovery enabled on here. We'll talk about that at the end of this session if there's time. If not, we'll talk about it in a separate session dedicated to this. But we've got rules. And at this point, we don't have any rules on our account. A rule is just matching an event and invoking a target. So that's the first thing that we need to do to get going. So to do this, we're going to go back into VS Code. And I'm going to drag, this is a little crazy, it'll make sense later. I'm going to move this function out of here into the event bus. And I'm going to move the events folder along with it. So that when we're working here inside our customer microservice, all we have right now is a SAM template. And that's all we need. So let's clean this up a little bit. We no longer have a function, so we no longer have globals. In fact, we no longer have outputs. In fact, we no longer have much of anything at all, right? So the first thing we want to do is create a rule. And this rule, I'm not sure if it's in the, yeah, it is, good. CloudWatch events rule, this is the VS Code extension for CloudWatch. So it's an AWS events rule. We're gonna name this expired subscription rule, because remember we said back in our diagram, we're working in this customer relations bounded context to handle expired subscriptions. So let me just do some cleanup here, make sure we don't have any questions. Okay, good. Now, what do we need in here? Properties, description is optional, but let's grab one. Much like Eric Johnson, who was on just a little bit before me, I was up late working on this, so I'm gonna steal some code as we go from myself last night. Today, me is very happy with last night, me right now, for running all this ahead of time. We're gonna give ourselves a little parameter here, just to make things easier on ourselves so that we have some logical references. We'll call it event bus name, give it a default. This is just a standard CloudWatch parameter. We give it the default of any company to match, but it also lets us listen to things further down here. The event bus name is what that's supposed to reference. In this case, rather than pull it from the SSM parameter, that creates, it's just beyond the scope of what we want to do right now. But you can insert this here in your pipeline whenever you're deploying by providing a value there. For today, we're going to be hard coding a lot of things that aren't relevant to Express workflows in particular. But first, we got to learn how to kick this off. So we have a source. This is just a top level field in an event. And if I can show you, a custom event can look like anything. It can be any JSON object, right? So we're gonna have source in here as com.anyCompany. And you can have things like detail type, anything you want. There are standard formats for AWS provided events. Those schemas are available in the EventBridge documentation, which are here again in those links. But for your event, you put whatever you want in there and you refer to it however you want. So in our case, we're going to grab anything that comes from our company app here, and detail type, we're looking for subscription expired events. And all this means when we go back over to this event is it's going to come in looking like this, right? That's it. That's all we got to do. Okay. Now, and you'll see I've got some sample events later that won't match this. We'll have some that come in from another source. They don't get handled. We'll have some that match a different type of event. They don't get handled. But any event that comes in that matches this pattern that we're specifying here, will trigger our target. And so we're not gonna deal with the detail field right now. Eric knows that I like to state my defaults. All right, so for a target, we're gonna have to give it the ARN of a workflow, the ID for the rule itself, and a role ARN, which is the role that the rule runs as. So it's the role to invoke our workflow. So we're gonna have to pause right here for a second. We need to create a workflow. It's gonna need its own role. And at the same time, we're gonna need to create a role for the rule, okay? So how do we do all this stuff? It's getting complicated, right? That's okay, we can handle this. We know that we need a workflow, so let's call it expired subscription workflow. We'll come back to that. We know that we need a role for that, so let's call it expired subscription role. And then we know that we need an invoke role, right? So as we build these out, we're going to be able to pick up the events coming across our custom event bus that match that pattern that we defined, right? So we're going to build these out now. We know from previously that we can use the AWS. I think it's, we're going for here, step function state machine. As our type. And I'm gonna go ahead and cheat and just pull this in, because that's gonna be a lot more effective than me typing all this for you. And we're gonna look at what we built. We're gonna need to change this definition here in a second, but let's start with this. So the only difference between this and a standard workflow is this state machine type express and this login configuration that we talked about earlier. I'm gonna pull that out because it can complicate things. But at this point, here's what we have. We have a publish events function that we're gonna get to in the end. Let's pull that out as well. We can take this down. I'm just cleaning this up for y'all. Bring it back to look like that in a minute. So if you want to know where all this stuff is going to live, there's a repo link there in the chat for you. I'll clean this up and push it up for afterwards. But we're starting again with this basic step function state machine configuration. We give it a name. We need to provide this role still, so let's build that. This is the difference between a standard and an express workflow, is a state machine type. And we give it a definition string, which at this point didn't need to be a sub in there. I deleted the wrong things. So let's see. Is that right? Let's see what happens. Let's see what happens next. And then we need to provide a role for this as well. I got to tell you, as I build here, I didn't sit down and write all of these last night. You know what I mean? Like, you got to build up a library for yourself, whether you do it in GitHub with gists, whether you pull from your previous projects. You got to build up a library. This stuff is complex, right? So you see this role that we just dropped in here. This we have to have. It has to be able to assume the role. This is all related to logging, so we can skip this for now. We'll take that out and bring it back later. But it still has to have a role, right? And then we have the invoke workflow role. So I'm actually going to comment some more things out here. I think I got a little bit out of order on y'all. I'm going to comment out this rule and just get down to the simplest thing we have, which is an express workflow, no logging configuration, a single pass state, and then its required role, right? So let's check here. We're in the customer service. We got our AWS profile set. Says it's a valid template. We'll see. And do our SAM deploy guided. So for this, we'll call it app 2025 customer. I deploy to US East 2. It's very Ohio. Keep that default value. Keep all the defaults for the rest of this. And then we'll see where this goes, and we can go back into the console once it's done. I got to tell y'all, last night I was going back and forth on the IAM permissions in the policy to set up logging for the Express workflows, and it was I beat my head against the wall for a little while, and it was 100% my own fault, because ultimately after a long time I went back and I read the actual documents. They were right there. Right there with what I needed. Okay, value of property definition string. Yeah, so it doesn't like that modification that I made. Let's, where's my definition string real quick? Give me just a second to clean this up, y'all. It's like that magic incantation that I can never quite get right. I was right. It's, I think it's that. Let's try this again. Oh. We don't need the guided anymore. We've already saved everything. Ah, yeah. Can you tell I've done this before? If you attempt to create a stack and on the first time it doesn't go, you have to delete that stack. CloudFormation. Now we can see what happens here. But yeah, always read the docs. Even when you think you know what you're doing, that's when it gets you, right? That pride of thinking, oh, I've put this in place before, it's fine, everything's fine. Narrator, it was not fine. So in the end, we read the docs get us there, and we'll be all right. Okay, hooray, successfully created updated stack. Now I want to show this to you real quick in the console. Go over here to step functions. We've got this, and you see this looks a little different, right? Because it's of type express. So we don't have our visualization here that we had before, like I mentioned earlier. That means ultimately we're gonna have to get logging turned on. Sorry, we do have this visualization. It's over here. What you won't get is the visualization of the execution, where you walk through at each state, getting your green states. So we still have the visualization that we expect, but not during execution. And so we have it here. We can start an execution. It won't really tell us anything because we haven't turned logging on, but it helpfully does tell us to see the execution status and history, enable logging on your state machine. All right. So we got a few things that we need to do here. We've got that in there. We need to enable logging. We need to finish the rule. We need to change the rule so that it can invoke the workflow. We need to finish the state machine. Let's do the logging configuration first. So I'm going to mark this here for logging configuration. Here's how you enable logs for your Express workflows. There's this highlighted block here. That's a logging configuration block. This is documented in the step functions logs link that I gave you over there. So we'll unhighlight that. This won't work right now because we don't have permissions to write out to these. Those permissions need to come into our role here. So we're going to add a policy down here. This is the part where I told you I had to learn how to read again last night because I'm hard-headed. Let's get to here. We need to give it a log group too. So let's do that first. We have to have somewhere to log. So step one, put your logging configuration here. We've told it we're going to write to this log group, so we need to create that log group. Right? We set our retention to be 7 days so that they'll age out. That's optional. And now we need to create the necessary policies. Again, I'll go back over here and prove to you that I can be taught by bringing this logs page down here. It's got a handy little configuring login and even a handy little IAM policies for logging to CloudWatch logs, which might look like the exact thing that I needed last night, right? So we can bring that in as a policy, and it will look like this. Okay, so there's a little bit of a difference here. I'm like a super lockdown kind of person. Technically, all of these will work with star, but these allow you to limit your actions even further, so we can only do them to our log group. So that's what I've done here. So the steps to get logging enabled, I guess first would be to create the log group. Second, create the logging configuration so that your workflow writes to that log group. And third, add this policy available from the docs into your role. And I need to give it, I knew something didn't look right there. There's statement policies, right? Here we go. That looks better to me. Okay. So Sam deploy again, see what happens here. Y'all, if this doesn't work, I might just throw everything in the air and go home because I fought with this. I'm just kidding. This is going to be fine because I read the docs. See, so we see it's created our log group for us here. It's modifying the role that our step function is running as. We just got to wait for that. And so once this is done, we'll do another execution so that you can see how the login works there. All right, super. Update complete. Hooray. See, when you read the docs? All right, so if we go back here, and now we go back into our state machine, we can see that logging is defined. And we've turned on all and included our execution data. And we have this CloudWatch logs group over here. So now we can start an execution, and this time, we see that we have exactly what we'd expect, right? Execution started, past state entered, past state exited, execution succeeded. And in here, you have some metadata around timestamps, length of execution, etc., right? So that you can understand how your workflow is executing. All right. So we've got our logs enabled. Now we want to go back. What was next, y'all? I forget. Kidding. Now we need to create a, so this gives us an ARN, right? Because it's a workflow. So that's going to be what we invoke. We'll give it a name, but we still need to create a role which allows it to invoke the Express workflow. Now, the good thing about this, when I copy and paste this one, it's going to be a lot shorter. Let's see here. So the service here isn't region specific. It's events.amazon AWS in your assume role policy document. And policy, again, you just give it a name. You allow it to start execution with a reference to our workflow, right? So it's a very tightly limited policy that we're creating for this rule. Realistically, you can move this back into your events bus account, because remember, we're talking about like an organization with multiple accounts, and then just add workflows to this policy as you go. That's an organizational thing and how you structure your rules. I'm doing it here so that we can see all the changes that we've made together. But this is an IAM policy that's going to allow us to invoke our step functions workflow. So now we can go back here and we can create our rule. We can uncomment all of this because we have everything we need, right? So we went through before, we gave it a name. We assigned the event bus, which is the custom event bus that we created last time. In our event, in the JSON object, we're going to filter for exact matches on these fields. It's enabled. Sorry, I write my YAML this way. For our ARN, we're going to use the expired subscription workflow, right? So whenever you reference a step function's workflow, the ARN is what's returned. ID, we got to give it a name. We'll call it expired subscription workflow. Why not? Mr. Creative over here. And then for the role, this is a little bit tricky. We need to get the .arn attribute on that role. Okay. So this is not the same as the ARN before. So what this means, this target block here, you can have up to 5 targets in a rule. Each target specifies the ARN of the resource that it's going to invoke, gives it a friendly name for you to see in the console, and then gives it an IAM role ARN that it executes as. So if we redeploy this, I was looking over here, no questions yet. I know this is like a little bit esoteric, so hopefully having the code to look at later is going to be the real value in this one. The example of having everything pulled together. We'll just wait for this. So what this is doing is wiring up our event bus to look for any event that matches that pattern we gave it. And then when it finds it, to invoke our workflow. So we'll see that be defined here. And while it's doing that, we can, at some point, we're going to need to kick off the definition of a state machine. That always fails for me the first time I execute it. I need to, I've got weird settings, y'all. All right, this is still going. So we're going to use this to define our actual workflow. And we'll start with a parallel state. And end with a pass state. And so what this is simulating here, remember we're talking about the business event or the business process and expired subscription. So you want to, like for our example, we're going to say do 2 things at the same time. 1, disable all the resources that subscription owns, but not necessarily delete. And 2, email the customer, right? And then at the end, you want to put the processing complete back onto the bus. So we'll come back to this in just a second. Now we see that deployed, so we can go back to the event bus and refresh. And now we have this rule here, right? Listening on the custom event bus for subscription expired events. And we can go in here and we see the event pattern is what we would expect. And we see the target is what we expect. We've got this state machine and a matched event. Right? So let's go back here. Let me find my events, because I know you don't want to see me type JSON objects. Let's open this up, and here in the root, so these are just sample events, and you'll notice that the event format, everything gets converted into Pascal case, which is the best case. Don't at me. Shri, sorry I just joined. Can you give a brief introduction of what we're doing today? Yeah, welcome. Thanks for joining us. We are hooking up express workflows from AWS Step Functions to our custom event bus to handle short running tasks of less than 5 minutes. So we're showing how to create a rule that filters events and triggers a workflow, and then at the end, we'll put that workflow back onto the bus. But as I was saying, if you look at our events here, they're in Pascal case, the best case. We have some that match. We have some that don't match. We have some that match based on detail type, and we have some that don't match based on detailed type, right? So we're actually gonna have 5 events here, and only 2 of these match what we're looking for. So we wanna test this out, and we wanna make sure that what we're expecting to happen happens. That is, we put 5 events in here. Two of them get picked up by the rule, and so we should see 2 step functions workflow executions. So if we go back over here to CloudWatch, and this log stream may not be the one that we get, right? We got 1 log stream, 4 entries, right? So we come back over here, and there's a console command that you can use, CLI command, big CLI fan, AWS events, put events, and the entries will be this file that we just created. That's not gonna work because I'm in the customer folder. There we go, AWS events, put events, entries, file, put events.json. Okay, and then this will run that command. It'll give us, all right, good. 0 failed entries, they all went in. We put 5 events on the bus. And so now if we go back over here, no surprise, we don't see that there, but aha, we've got 2 new log streams, right? And if we look at these, we've logged out in our past state the data that we were provided, and we see that this matched on detail type subscription expired and source com.anycompany, which was exactly what we wanted to see. So our rule is set up to filter based on that type and based on the source, right? But at this point, we're not really doing anything with either with our workflow or at the end of it. What we want to do to complete the pattern is do some of that processing we were talking about and then put it back onto the bus. So real quick, let's go back. We can close this. And we can go back to our workflow that we talked about. We're gonna define this workflow with process cancellation, and we'll start there. That's gonna be a parallel state. So we're gonna give it 2 branches, state 1 and state 2. And we'll start at, suspend all resources and send expiration email, right? And so these are just standing in for actual workflows that you would do, whether it's another workflow or a Lambda function or something like that. We just want to suspend these here with past states, or let these stand in here. So we'll call that, that. End. I like my ends like that. I always hit save. If you were with us on Tuesday, you know that about me. I mess that up every time, and that's okay. And then once both of these are complete, we're going to publish to EventBridge. All right. This will be a past state. We don't need to put any of that in there. We don't need to deal with any of this. And then this will be an end state, right? Okay, so let's see. Happy, happy, happy. We've got no red. We like no red. Let's visualize it here. All right. And just as we expect, this is more analogous to, like, it's a simple workflow, but it's a real workflow, right? So if we're handling this subscription expired event in that customer bounded context, what we want to do is suspend all of that customer's resources, send an expiration email to them, which hopefully encourages them to come back and reactivate their subscription, right? And then once those 2 things are done, we want to publish to EventBridge a new type of event saying that we've completed processing this. So let's take these states out of here. And we're going to drop them into our actual workflow definition. Under states, right? And these I need to do some, whoops, bear with me while I do some, that was not right. While I do some, what do you call it? Housekeeping? I don't know. Branches. There's probably a better way I could have formatted this, right? But I don't actually know if it'll stay if I leave it this way. Anyway, we're almost done. This will be brief. Publish to EventBridge. Okay. Do I have like extras in here? What's happening, y'all? Does anybody know? I don't know. I don't know what's going on here. All right, nope, that's correct. Those match. States match. Publish to EventBridge matches. Next, publish to EventBridge. Pull these back. Okay. Not the most interesting part of this demo, but still. YAML lining. That's right. YAML lining. Still my favorite language. It's not my favorite language, but still better than JSON. So again, we can update now. We need to go back to our customer directory and deploy this. Again, last week we talked about in the real world, this would be a separate pipeline in a separate account, right? Because you would have the customer team working on the customer microservice. It would not be in the same mono repo like we, missing process cancellation state is not reachable. It's because I failed to update some stuff. I know how to fix that. We're just keeping them in the same repo for convenience here so that you have one reference to go back to and look at all this at once. And once that finishes failing to update, we'll redeploy it. And then the final step that we'll need to look at here is getting this final event back onto the event bus. As of today, Step Functions does not provide a way to natively like do a service integration back to EventBridge to put final events on the event bus. You can handle the state transition events, which are AWS native events on your default event bus that are already in your service account. But remember, we're looking for the business events on our event bus. That's why we created a custom event bus. And we see this is updated already. We can go back here and put some more events on there. They all get picked up. They all run through. Go back here and look at our definition again. And now we see, just as we'd expect, we've got these nice, more realistic, but simple business process diagram here. And again, we've got these top 2 rows because we filtered those 5 events down to 2 matching events. But you can see now this is a lot more information for us to look at. You will want to configure the amount of logging that you have, whether you want to log transitions or not, whether you want to log only errors and warnings, etc. I just want you to see what's possible and see the amount of data that you can capture here. All right. So last things last, we need to put some events back onto the bus. Everybody on the bus, right? That means we're going to need to take our state machine here, and instead of publish to EventBridge as a pass state, let's make this a Lambda task state. Publish to EventBridge. End true, and then we can get rid of some of this other stuff like this. Resources defined, parameters, we'll have to give it a function name. We'll have to give it a payload. This is again the JSON path notation that we've talked briefly about. We're going to do a whole episode on the step functions series dedicated to input path, output path, and result path. So at this point, we can just grab this state. We're going to have to do some YAML lining again, but it'll be quick, I promise. Because we're only replacing this line. All right. Or this state. Boop, boop. All right. I know some of y'all out there are like, don't bother. And I'm like, you don't understand the power of my OCD. Okay. In here, a couple things are going to have to happen, right? We're going to need to create a Lambda function or wire this up dynamically, right? So now is where we go back to that magic incantation I've given you earlier, where you substitute everything in here. And when we do that, remember sub takes 2 arguments. The first is your template string, and the second is a map of values that you want to substitute. And so in here, we're going to want to give it something like publish to EventBridge. We'll give it a variable that we want to replace, right? We're going to add a Lambda function here. Publish event functions ARN. And for the payload, let's just take that subscription ID that we've been passing through and pass it in as well. So what this means is we're going to create a variable at the top level, and we're going to populate that with the value of detail.subscriptionID from our original event that we passed in, that we created over here. All right, so we've got this detail subscription ID field. Well, since we gave it a name there, we have to give this a value. We have to get this value from somewhere. And there's a couple ways that we can do this. Looking at time, we got 14 minutes. I'm going to do this the right way. I think we've got 14 minutes to do this the right way. We're going to change this to publish events function ARN, which is going to be another parameter. I say the right way because it's my belief that this should live with the EventBridge custom event bus. Because it's a function that's going to get reused over and over. You don't want to rebuild it in every microservice. It's a simple function that takes any event and it throws it on the bus, right? That's all it does. So it takes like an event bus argument, it takes an event argument, and then it puts B on A, and then it returns happy days, right? So it doesn't do any processing, filtering, anything else. It's just sort of a stopgap until hopefully we get a service integration for AWS step functions and events in EventBridge. That'd be great, wouldn't it? The ARN of the Lambda proxy function. Don't want function name, just want function. Type string. Today we're probably going to go back once we create this and just copy paste that default in there. Let's see. So this is what I was doing earlier. Let me close up customer here. Whenever I dragged that whole hello world function into here, that's what I was doing. Just putting that there so that we had time to do this the right way. So while I'm going over and pulling this over, something to remember. If our state machine is going to call that Lambda function, it needs to have IAM permissions to invoke it as well. So after all of these policies, we're going to give it another policy which allows it to invoke Lambda function, and that'll just be ref, whatever we call that up top, publish events function ARN. Yeah, good. Okay, so now it can invoke that function. Now I'm going to close this stuff for a second. We've gotten everything out of our state machine that we want. It looks the way we want it to look. So we're going to close this. I'm going to close this sample event because we built several events. So we're going to close this. These events are just going to stay the same. We've got them. That's wonderful. And then this is our customer template. So we're going to get rid of that as well. Now we need to add a new resource here, which is going to be our publish events function. Code URI publish events, so we need to rename this. It's going to do app.lambda handler, which if you haven't seen, it's already in here. I'm going to replace this code in a minute. Runtime Node.js, yes. It needs a policy that allows it to put events onto this event bus, but we already know we can refer to that dynamically. And that's all it needs to be able to do, right? Just needs to be able to put events onto our event bus. And we'll probably want our publish events ARN. The ARN of, whew, y'all, itchy. Lambda function, because we're gonna need to pull this in. Whoa, that was so meta. What just happened there? Oh, missing space. It's always a missing space. Okay. Super. So now I'm going to give you some simple code in here. Let's get rid of all of this. And again, I wrote this last night. I am not a JavaScript developer, so if you don't like my JavaScript, you're probably right. But all this does, brings in the SDK. We don't actually have to run through the whole package JSON thing because that's going to be in the environment. Give ourselves a new EventBridge client. We receive an event. We parse out that subscription ID. We create, this is a new event. So when you call EventBridge.putEvents, you need an object with an item called entries, which is a list of events. So this is a single event. This is a list of one item of event. And in this case, we'll see this won't match our existing rule, right? Because this is expiration processed. And we were looking for subscription expired previously. So it's okay, we're not gonna be in a loop here. Just give it some information that we want. We pass that subscription ID in the detail, and then we just log out some information. So that's all we need to do here. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward, simple Lambda function. Just takes that event that we give it, throws it onto the bus. Nope. No wonder. I was already where I thought I should be. Let's make sure we got a nice, decent SAM file here. We got 7 minutes left. I think we're gonna get this done. I love to push this right up to the end, y'all. Knowledge. And let's deploy this. Template format error, unrecognized resource types, AWS serverless function. Oh, you know why? I deleted that transform in there. I also didn't SAM build. I'm surprised the EDJ Geek didn't catch me and call me out on that one. You can do it. I'm trying, buddy. I'm trying. I'm going. Let me get this transform that we need. Put that pretty little transform right there. And now we can do SAM build, which will package up our app nicely for us. And then SAM deploy, which will take it, upload the code, create that Lambda function for us with the rule. We got 6 minutes left. I think it's almost guaranteed at this point that I probably missed something in IAM. So let's see how this goes for us. I can't be everywhere. I have faith in you, brother. You can be. Actually, I don't need you to be everywhere. I just need you to be here with me. Here with me, right? I'm just kidding, buddy. I appreciate you. So we're waiting. All right, super. That role's done. Function's done. Stack's updated. Everybody's happy. We got this ARN for the event bus. And here's the one we really need, right? This is the ARN of our Lambda function. We're going to hard code this for today. Obviously not the right way to do that. The new SAM deploy process is awesome. It is. It would be more awesome if Twitch respected those backticks that you were trying to do to highlight. But you know, this is the world we live in. We make do with what we get, with what we can. All right, so this is event bus. We're gonna close all this stuff out. We're gonna go back to customer. Remember in our template, we said that we were just gonna put that default value right there. for the publish events function ARN. Now at this point, maybe EDJ knows the answer to this. He is Yoda. I need to get Sam deploy to update this. I think the right answer is going to be to run Sam deploy guided again to recapture this parameter, because this is a new parameter that we're giving it. But we put it in here and we've tried to wire it up, and we got 5 minutes left. So y'all, it's getting serious. It's getting serious right now. Let's see what we got here. We don't have any Lambda functions. We've just got this. Let's run Sam deploy guided. Failed to parse template while scanning a simple key. Ah. Look at that. That's a it's a hard return there. Don't know how that happened. Things happen. All right. Okay. You know, well, may that be our hiccup. Yes, run it again. I am running it again. -G works too. It does, but why would I use that? Hey, picked up our new parameter here. So look at that. Save that. Wait for the change set to be created. This will only take a minute because we're just the part you are editing is behind the caption, so hard to see and help debug. Oh. By the way, you know you can move those captions around. Just grab and move them on the screen, or if you click the settings cog, you can collapse them to a box. You can hide them all together. If you just prefer listening to my soothing baritone, tell a dad joke. Three-legged dog walks into a bar and says, "I'm looking for the man that shot my paw." That's all I got. It's the only dog joke I got. We are done deploying here. So you didn't know that one? You didn't know that one? You live out in the great American West and you don't know that joke? I should have said saloon. Maybe you heard it that way before. So we think we've wired all this up. We got 3 minutes left. Let's put some events on the bus and see what happens. First, we probably want to be in the correct directory to put some events on the bus. And ta-da. All right. 5 events outbound, y'all. And we know already that we should see 2 be picked up. So we go back over here. Nothing's really changed for this. We come back here. Expired subscription process. We go back to our logs. And let's see. 1457. 2 executions. That's great, y'all. That's great. Execution failed. Oh, I told you I was going to get it. We got all the way into our publish to EventBridge state. The JSON path specified for the field cannot be found in the input. Huh. Detail type, subscription expired, region, detail subscription ID. .detail.subscription ID. Okay, why not? Should be in there. I see it. Detail subscription ID. Maybe it's something because I put the that hyphen there makes things go crazy instead of a. I bet that's what it is. I'm gonna use my last minute here with y'all to change a hyphen to an underscore and see if that's it. If I don't get that done, since it was working last night, it will work. We also did some filtering here with like pushing stuff in there, so doesn't necessarily mean that was going to get done correctly. So here's customer, past state, subscription ID, detail.subscription ID. I wonder what I've done here. This is one of those that's going to be interesting to debug. Well, it actually matches what I had before. So let's take a look at our Let's see if the other one did the same thing. This is what, ending in 9F, 9E. Execution failed. JSON path.detail.subscription ID specified for the field could not be found in this input. I see why. Do you see it? Do you see it? It's a collection of events. That's why. So I'll need to manipulate this a little bit and see where I went wrong there. It may be just at some point I didn't. It's because it's we added that parallel state, so two states come back out, and both of them have that field. We didn't set where the result paths went to. One quick workaround would just be to put the 0 there and take the first copy. That's not the right answer, so I'm going to fix this up the right way. Push it to the repo. The repo is here in the chat. It's 3 o'clock. I want to thank you all for joining. I know this was a very deep dive. I'm going to write this up and step through this in parts as well, split these up into videos. But again, the workflow that we covered was picking up events from EventBridge, passing them to an Express workflow, and then putting them back onto an EventBridge event bus. Thank you all for joining. I'll see you next Tuesday for AWS Step Functions.